Welcome to Springfield Career Insights. Tonight, we interrogate the civic, emotional, and institutional dimensions of divorce, a rupture that reshapes families, redefines identity, and tests the boundaries of law, culture, and compassion. Is divorce a failure of love or a failure of structure? Can a covenant collapse without blame? Or must someone always be punished? We explore how dignity, not just legality, must guide the dissolution of marriage. In this episode, we ask, what happens when emotional neglect is invisible to the law? Can a divorced home still be a dignified one? And are we preparing youth for weddings or for marriage? We are joined by His Excellency Dr. Godfrey Gandawa, President of Springfield Research University, legal strategist, and architect of sovereign institutional design. His work reframes marriage as a covenant of clarity, not a ceremony of convenience. Welcome, President. We are honored to host you.
Thank you, Advocate. At Springfield, we believe that marriage must be more than emotional. It must be architectural, structured in covenant, protected by law, and sustained by mutual dignity. When divorce occurs, it must be diagonized, not just processed, because the collapse of a home is not just personal, it is civic.
Thank you, Professor. What does it mean when I do becomes I'm done?
Okay. What does it mean when I do becomes I'm done? It means the covenant has been tested and found wanting. It means the architecture of union has collapsed under the weight of silence, fatigue, and unmet need. It means the promise made in public has been eroded in private. It is not just the end of affection. It is the failure of alignment. I do is the language of beginning. It is the declaration of intent, the ceremony of hope. But I am done is the language of aftermath. It is the verdict of experience, the testimony of pain. When I do becomes I'm done, we must not ask who failed, but what failed. Was it the emotional scaffolding, the institutional support, the cultural script that taught us how to marry, but never how to endure? This shift is not just emotional, it is civic, because every divorce redraws the map of society. It reconfigures the home, rewrites the inheritance of children, and redefines the meaning of commitment. I am done is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is accountability. It is the refusal to perform happiness. So you see people performing, they pretend to be happy when they're not. The courage to exit a structure that no longer protects dignity. So what does it mean? It means we must reimagine covenant, not as a ceremony of convenience, but as a constitution of clarity. It means we must prepare our youth not just for vows, but for the architecture of truth and endurance. It means we must build marriages that are not just romantic, but anchor on truth.
Thank you, Professor. Can a wedding be legally valid but emotionally premature?
Yes. And therein lies the paradox. You see, a wedding may be legally valid, signed in ink, sealed by statute, witnessed by law, and archived in the civic ledger. But emotional readiness is not a legal artifact. It cannot be notarized. It cannot be summoned by ceremony. The law requires consent, but the heart requires coherence. And too often, we confuse the presence of a signature with the presence of understanding. Some enter marriage with trembling hope, others with inherited obligation. Some are chased by timelines, others by tradition. So they start telling you, hey, your hairs are running out. You have grown. Hey. So you start chasing timelines. Then others is tradition. So when the vows are spoken, but the soul remains unsummoned, this is not a condemnation. It is a diagnosis. For when legality outpaces intimacy, we do not merely risk divorce. We risk disillusionment. The quiet erosion of trust, the slow unraveling of self. Let our institutions teach this, that marriage is not a civic milestone, but a covenant of emotional maturity. That readiness is not measured by age, is it? But by depth. That love must be cultivated, not coerced. For a wedding may be valid in the eyes of the state, yet premature in the chambers of the soul. And in that gap between legality and intimacy, we must build bridges, not just altars.
Thank you, Professor. Is divorce always a failure or sometimes a form of survival?
Thank you, Advocate. Let us not confuse the end of a marriage with the collapse of a soul. Let us not mistake the dissolution of vows for the disintegration of dignity. Divorce may wear the cloak of failure in courtrooms, in whispers, in cultural shame. But beneath that cloak, there is often a battered spirit, choosing breath over bondage, clarity over confusion, freedom over fear. Some marriages are monuments to endurance. Others are mausoleums of silence. And when love becomes a ledger of pain, when the home becomes a hostage chamber, then departure is not betrayal. It is survival. The law permits divorce, but the heart must authorize it. And when it does, it is not always a retreat. It can be reclamation. Reclamation of voice, of vision, of vitality. Let our civic education teach this, that survival is not shameful, that living is not weakness, that sometimes the bravest act is to walk away from what once felt eternal. For in the ruins of a broken union, one may find the blueprint to rebirth. And in the silence after the final decree, one may hear the first whisper of selfhood. Divorce is not always failure, Advocate. Sometimes it is the refusal to fail oneself.
Thank you, Professor. When does staying become more harmful than living, and who decides?
Thank you, Advocate. Staying becomes harmful when the home becomes a habitat for silence, where love no longer lives. You are in a home and there is no longer love there. So, love no longer lives there, but lingers like obligation. You are just obligated to be there. When the relationship no longer nourishes, but numbs. When presence becomes punishment and absence feels like relief, it becomes harmful. You know, if I'm happy to be away on a workshop than be at home, the home has become harmful. When dignity is traded for endurance, when the children learn tension before tenderness, and when the self begins to vanish in the name of loyalty. But who decides? Not the neighbors, not the pastor, not the law, not the culture that romanticizes suffering and calls it strength. The one who decides is the one who feels the fracture, the one who wakes up and no longer recognizes their reflection, the one who has measured the cost of staying silent, of staying small, of staying for everyone but themselves. Let our civic education teach this, that living is not abandonment, when staying would mean self-erasure, that the decision to depart is not a failure of commitment, it is a triumph of clarity. Let our institutions support this with counseling, with courage, with language that dignifies departure as a form of survival. For staying becomes harmful when it demands the death of self. And the one who decides must be empowered to choose life, even if it means walking away.
Thank you, Professor. Does our legal system dissolve marriages or merely redistribute consequences?
Thank you, Advocate. Let us strip the illusion. The gavel does not erase history. The decree does not disinfect pain. The courtroom may declare a union ended, but it cannot unweave the hairs, undo the entanglements, or silence the echoes of shared life. What the law dissolves is the contract. What remains is the residue of debts, of children, of memories that do not obey jurisdiction. Divorce is not a clean break. It is a redistribution. A redistribution of assets, of access, of blame, of burden. It is the state's attempt to reassign what love once held together. And yet, the law is not cruel. It is procedural. It seeks fairness, not healing. It balances the ledger, but it cannot balance the heart. Let our civic education teach this. That legal dissolution is not emotional resolution. That consequences do not vanish, they migrate. From shared calendars to custody schedules, from joint accounts to solitary rights. We must prepare our citizens not just for marriage, but for its aftermath. Not just for vows, but for verdicts. For the law may close the case, but the soul must still carry the evidence. So, no. The legal system does not dissolve marriages. It redistributes consequences and leaves the healing to us.
Thank you, Professor. Are divorce courts equipped to protect dignity or just property?
Thank you, Advocate. Let us enter the chamber and listen not to the verdict, but to the silence between the clauses. For while the law tallies assets, it rarely tallies anguish. It divides homes, but not heartbreak. It assigns custody, but not closure. Divorce courts are built on arithmetic. Who owns what? Who owes whom? Who gets the house, the car, the pension? But dignity is not a line item, you see? It is not listed in the pleadings. It is not weighed by the judge. And yet, dignity is the most fragile asset of all. It arrives bruised, often buried beneath accusation, and rarely leaves intact. The law may be neutral, but neutrality is not empathy. Procedure may be fair, but fairness is not healing. So we must ask, do our courts merely redistribute property? Or do they restore personhood? Do they offer sanctuary or just a settlement? Let our civic education teach this, that justice must not only be blind, it must be humane, that the architecture of law must evolve to shelter the soul, not just the estate. For if we emerge from divorce with our assets intact, but our dignity erased, then the system has succeeded in arithmetic. It has succeeded much in arithmetic, but failed in humanity. Let us recalibrate. Let us design courts that do not just dissolve marriages, but dignify the people who survived them.
Thank you, Professor. Can custody battles become a form of emotional warfare?
Thank you, Advocate. Yes. And too often they do. What begins as a plea for protection can mutate into a theater of pain. The child becomes the battleground or the battlefield. The affidavit becomes the ammunition, and love, once shared, becomes weaponized. Custody is meant to safeguard the child. But in the fog of resentment, it can become a contest of control, a proxy war of unresolved grief, a courtroom choreography of accusation and defense. The law asks, who is fit? Who is stable? Who provides? But it rarely asks, who heals? Who listens? Who nurtures without narrative? And so, the child is pulled between calendars and court orders, between whispered blame and silent guilt. They carry the verdict not in paper, but in posture, in sleep, in trust undone. Let our civic education teach this. That custody is not a conquest. That children are not trophies. That emotional warfare leaves no victors, only casualties too young to testify. Let our statutes evolve to prioritize peace over punishment, presence over possession, and healing over hierarchy. For when custody becomes combat, we do not just fracture families. You see, we fracture futures.
Thank you, Professor. What happens when one partner leaves emotionally long before they leave physically?
Hey, think and forget. You're saying, what happens when one partner leaves emotionally long before they leave physically? A quiet departure begins, not with luggage, but with silence. Not with footsteps, but with absence in presence. They are still there in the home. At the dinner table, they are there. In the shared bedroom, they are there. In the family photo, they are there. But the gaze no longer lingers. They're no longer there. The laughter no longer lends. The touch no longer speaks. Emotionally, they have crossed the threshold. They have packed away hope, folded intimacy into memory, and locked away the will to repair. Yet physically, they remain out of duty, out of fear, out of habit, all for the children who still believe. This dissonance is not benign. It is corrosive. It breeds confusion, erodes trust, and teaches the other partner to doubt their own instincts. Let our civic education name this. Emotional departure is not invisible. It leaves fingerprints on tone. You can hear the way they talk to you, that they are no longer in love, that they are no longer there. On timing, on tenderness withheld. They are no longer tender with you. They just throw amagama. They throw words that destroy you. Means they are no longer there. And when the body stays but the soul has fled, we do not have a marriage. We have a performance. A choreography of cohabitation where love is no longer the script. So let our institutions teach this, that emotional honesty is not cruelty, it is clarity. That staying physically while absent emotionally is not noble, it is numbing. For when one partner lives in spirit long before they live in form, the relationship becomes a ghost town populated by gestures, but haunted by what's missing.
Thank you, Professor. Is emotional neglect a valid ground for divorce or still legally invisible?
Thank you, Advocate. Let us begin with the silence. So, the silence that grows not from peace, but from abandonment. So, the silence that replaces conversation with a cold routine, presence with performance, touch with tolerance. Emotional neglect is not loud. It does not bruise the skin. It does not shatter glass. But it erodes the soul quietly, daily, relentlessly. And yet, in many jurisdictions, the law still asks for proof of harm. You are injured, deeply injured, fractured, but they don't want to believe. They want you to prove. They want proof of harm. You see, in invisible terms. Infidelity, abuse, abandonment. But what of the partner who sleeps besides indifference, who dines with dismissal, who raises children in a house where love has been exiled. Emotional neglect is not a moment, it is a pattern. A withdrawal of warmth, a refusal to engage, a slow starvation of intimacy. So let our statutes evolve. We are the lawyers. Let our civic education name this. That neglect is not the absence of violence. You see? It is the presence of void. And that void sustained is the grounds for grief, for departure, for legal recognition. For when the law sees only bruises, it misses the brokenness that cannot be photographed. And when emotional neglect remains legally invisible, we teach our citizens to enjoy what should be escaped. Let us recalibrate. Let us dignify the unseen wounds. Let us declare that emotional neglect is not just real. It is reason. Reason to live. Reason to heal. Reason to be believed.
Thank you, Professor. Can forgiveness delay healing or accelerate it?
Thank you, Advocate. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is a threshold. And crossing it too soon can feel like betrayal, not of the offender, but of the self. When forgiveness is rushed, it becomes a performance. You see? You see them, you say, okay, I've forgiven you, I've forgiven you. You see? It's a performance. A peace treaty signed before the war is understood. It silences the wound before it has spoken. It wraps pain in politeness. It calls it closure. But when forgiveness is earned, when it rises from reflection, from truth-telling, from the full accounting of harm, then it becomes a catalyst, not a shortcut, but a sacred release. You must see that this person that you are forgiving an issue, they are remorseful. You see? Forgiveness in its rightful time does not erase the past. Because the church teaches us forgive and forget. No, it does not erase the past. I can forgive you, but the injury that is in me remains there. It reclaims the future. It does not excuse the injury. It transforms the injury. Let our civic education teach this, that forgiveness is not a weakness, nor is delay a flaw. If I delay forgiving you, it's not a flaw. Healing demands honesty. And sometimes honesty demands waiting. For premature forgiveness can delay healing by skipping the reckoning. But authentic forgiveness can accelerate it by honoring the journey. So let us dignify both. The pause before the pardon and the power within it. For healing is not a race, and forgiveness is not a trophy. It is a threshold we cross when we are ready. to walk free.
Thank you, Professor. Let's take a break and listen to a song called Two Names, One Nation.
Came with two names, but left with one nation. This is not a romance, it is a republic, founded on vows, governed by grace. We stood in the square of the sacred and sworn, where the flags of our families were folded and worn. You spoke like a sunrise, I answered like flame, and the anthem began with your name and my name. Two names, one nation, two hearts, one hymn. We rise as one in Springfield's rhythms. Yavuma, Sitandana. We are sovereign. We are some. Lena kusio inzaba yetfu kupela kuyimpilo yelive. Sivumelane ngekuthi luthando lube ngumthetho. Sakalevlelisha. Yekuthi sibe munye. We danced where the statutes were carved in the stone, where the echoes of elders became our own. You wore the robe, I bore the ring, and Springfield sang, let the covenant begin. Two names, one nation, two hearts, one hymn. We rise as one in Springfield's rhythms. Yavuma, Sitandana. We are sovereign, we are some. Let the bells ring not for union, but for uprising. Let the robes flow not for fashion, but for founding. This is Springfield's decree. Marriage is nationhood, and love is law.
Welcome back. Let's continue with our discussion. Does financial independence make divorce easier or just more likely?
Let us begin with the paradox, advocate. So empowerment can be both a bridge and a boundary. When one partner gains financial independence, they gain options to stay by choice or to live by courage. In the absence of independence, marriage may become a necessity, a shelter from economic storms, a compromise carved by survival. But when autonomy arrives, so does the ability to question. Is this union nourishing or merely enjoying? Financial independence does not cause divorce. You see? It reveals possibility. It lifts the veil from tolerated dysfunction, from silenced dreams, from partnerships built on dependence, not depth. Yes, it may make divorce easier. Not because it trivializes commitment, but because it dignifies choice. So it allows one to live without destitution, to choose healing over hostagehood, So let our civic education teach this, that independence is not a threat to marriage. It is a test of its integrity. That when both partners are free to live, only then can staying be sacred. For financial independence may increase the likelihood of divorce, but only where love was already bankrupt. And in such cases, living is not failure. It is fiscal and emotional survival.
Thank you, Professor. Can divorce empower one partner while economically erasing the other?
Thank you, Advocate. Yes. Yes. And the imbalance is often systemic. Divorce is not just a separation of hearts. It is a redistribution of power. And when one partner holds the purse strings, the other may leave the marriage only to enter poverty. Empowerment is not universal. It is shaped by access, by education, by who earned, who paused their career, who raised the children, who sacrificed ambition for domestic stability. You see, the law may speak of equitable division, but equity is not equality. And fairness on paper may still feel like punishment in practice. Some walk away with portfolios, others with promises, some rebuild with resources, others with resilience alone. So let our civic education teach this, that economic justice is not a luxury, it is a necessity. That divorce must not just dissolve the union, but dignify both departures. Let our statutes evolve, Advocate, to recognize unpaid labor, to protect the economically vulnerable, to ensure that empowerment is not a privilege reserved for the already powerful. For when divorce empowers one and erases the other, we do not just fail a marriage, we fail a citizen. And in that failure, we fracture the very promise of justice.
Thank you, Professor. What does it mean to rebuild identity after being legally unjoined?
Yeah, thank you, Advocate. So it means standing in the ruins of a shared name, a shared home, a shared future, and choosing not just to survive, but to reimagine. Legal unjoining is procedural. It severs the contract, splits the assets, reassigns the surname. But identity is not a document, it is a narrative. And when the story has been co-authored for years, rewriting it alone requires courage. To rebuild identity is to ask, who am I without we? What dreams were deferred? What voice was softened? What self was sacrificed at the altar of compromise? It is not a return to the past, but a reclamation of possibility. It is the slow sovereign act of choosing new rituals, new rhythms, new roles. Let our civic education teach this, that divorce is not just an ending. You see, it is a beginning. That rebuilding is not regression, it is resurrection. And that identity once fractured can be reforged with greater clarity, greater dignity, greater truth. For to be legally unjoined is not to be undone. It is to be invited to author the next chapter with the ink that belongs solely to you.
Thank you, Professor. Are faith institutions offering healing or just quoting scripture?
Thank you, Advocate. Let us enter the sanctuary and listen not to the sermon, but to the silence between the verses. For scripture may be sacred, but healing is not automatic. It requires presence, not just proclamation. Too often, the wounded arrive carrying divorce, despair, emotional neglect, fractured identity. And they are met not with the counsel, but with quotation. Not with listening, but with liturgy. Faith must do more than recite. Recite the verses. It must respond. It must descend from the pulpit and sit beside the broken. It must translate doctrine into dignity, ritual into restoration. Quoting scripture is not wrong, but when it becomes a substitute for empathy, a shield against discomfort, a bypass around trauma, then it ceases to heal and begins to alienate. So let our civic and spiritual education teach this, that faith is not just a voice, it is a vessel. That healing requires interpretation, integration, and intimacy. Let our institutions recalibrate to train not just preachers, but pastoral healers. To offer not just verses, but validation. To create spaces where pain is not silenced by sanctity, but sanctified by compassion. For when faith becomes a fortress of quotation, it forgets its mission. But when it becomes a sanctuary of healing, it fulfills its calling.
Thank you, Professor. Can cultural shame around divorce prevent civic support?
Thank you, Advocate. Yes. And the silence is institutional. So when divorce is framed as disgrace, the divorced become invisible, not just in conversation, but in policy, in programming, in public compassion. So cultural shame does not just wound the individual, it distorts the civic lens. So it teaches governments to overlook, schools to ignore, faith institutions to whisper, and communities to withdraw. The result? A citizen in crisis, unseen by the very systems designed to serve. No counseling, no reintegration, no economic scaffolding, just stigma dressed as tradition. Let our civic education confront this. That shame is not a virtue, it is a barrier. And when shame dictates visibility, support becomes selective and justice becomes conditional. We must recalibrate our institutions to recognize divorce not as moral failure, but as a moment requiring civic dignity, to offer not just legal exit, but emotional and economic re-entry. For when cultural shame silences the divorced, we do not just fail individuals, we fail the architecture of care. And in that failure, we fracture the promise of citizenship itself.
Wow, this is amazing. Let's take a commercial break and stay tuned.
At Springfield Research University, we don't teach to pass exams, we encode futures. grounded in Education 6.0 and powered by STEMmer, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, and automation. We deliver modular, sovereign learning across undergraduate, master's, and doctoral programs. Explore our prospectus, where every curriculum is designed to STEMatize every discipline, dignify local authorship, and credential transformative knowledge. Be STEMatized, be sovereign. Here, knowledge is authored, not borrowed. Curriculum is credentialed, not copied. Every graduate becomes an architect of transformation. With 2 annual intakes, March and September, the path to innovation is always open. From the logic of automation to the soul of indigenous intelligence, SRU is where tomorrow is designed. Springfield isn't just a university, it's an epicenter of epistemic dignity. Join the movement. Study where learning governs itself. Springfield Research University, the globe is here. Where are you?
Welcome back. Let's continue with our discussion. Is the stigma of divorce heavier for women or just differently shaped for men?
Stigma does not weigh evenly, advocate. It molds itself to gender, to culture, to expectation. For women, divorce may summon whispers of failure, of defiance, of being too much or not enough. She may be judged not just as a partner, but as a mother, as a symbol of broken domesticity. She is asked, why couldn't you hold it together? Why didn't you enjoy? Why did you choose freedom over family? You see? For men, the stigma wears a different mask, less visible, but no less potent. He may be seen as irresponsible, emotionally absent, or incapable of commitment. He is asked, why couldn't you provide? Why did you abandon? Why did you fail to lead? Both are burdened, but the burdens are sculpted by stereotype. Women are shamed for living, men are shamed for losing. And in both cases, the individual is eclipsed by the narrative. So let our civic education dismantle this. That divorce is not a gendered disgrace, but a human decision. That healing must not be filtered through patriarchal expectations or cultural choreography. Let our institutions recalibrate to offer support without bias, compassion without condition, and dignity without distortion. For stigma may wear different shapes, but its weight is unjust in every form. And justice demands that we lift it from every shoulder.
Thank you, Professor. What do children learn when love collapses in front of them?
Thank you, Advocate. They learn that silence can be louder than shouting, that a dinner table can feel like a courtroom, that two people can share a roof and still live in exile. They watch affection unravel, not in a single moment, but in the slow erosion of warmth, the withdrawal of laughter, the choreography of avoidance. Children are not blind. They read the tone like scripture, decode glances like riddles, and absorb tension like oxygen. When love collapses in front of them, they learn about fragility, that promises can fracture, that forever can expire, that safety is not guaranteed. Some internalize the conflict, blaming themselves for the storm. Others build walls, vowing never to trust, never to need, never to feel. Let our civic education teach this, that children are not passive witnesses. They are emotional archivists. And when they observe, becomes what they expect, what they fear, what they replicate. Let our institutions respond with counseling, with compassion, with curricula that dignify emotional literacy. Let us teach not just maths and science, but how to name pain, how to process rupture, how to rebuild after relational collapse. For when love collapses in front of a child, we must not just protect their body, we must protect their blueprint for love.
Thank you, Professor. Can a divorced home still be a dignified one?
Yes, and it must be. Divorce may alter the architecture, separate bedrooms, split calendars, 2 addresses where once there was one, but dignity is not measured in square footage. It is measured in tone, in tenderness, in the way love adapts when structure shifts. A dignified home is not defined by marital status. It is defined by emotional climate, by how the children are spoken to, by how conflict is managed, by how healing is modeled in the aftermath of rupture. Divorce does not erase the possibility of grace. It invites it. It demands that adults rise above resentment, that co-parents become co-architects of stability, that the home, though reconfigured, still teaches safety, still offers warmth, still honors truth. So let our civic education teach this, that dignity is not the property of intact marriages. It belongs to any household where respect is practiced, where wounds are acknowledged, where love is recalibrated, not abandoned. Let our institutions support this with counseling, with community, with language that affirms rather than condemns. For when we dignify the divorced home, we dignify the children within it and the adults who choose healing over hostility. A divorced home can be dignified, not despite its separation, but because of how it chooses to rebuild.
Thank you, Professor. Finally, Professor, what counsel do you offer someone who feels the need to leave but hesitates to decide?
Thank you, Advocate. To the one who feels the need to leave but hesitates to decide, and there are many, you are not weak. You are discerning. And hesitation in its purest form is the soul's way of asking for clarity before it commits to rapture. You see? Living is not a single act. You don't just, I'm now leaving. It is a sequence of grief, of guilt, of gathering courage from corners long neglected. It is not just walking away from someone, but walking towards yourself. You hesitate because you care, because you once believed, because the history is heavy and the consequences are real. But let me offer this counsel. Do not confuse endurance with healing. Do not mistake silence for peace. Do not wait for permission from a world that does not feel your ache. Ask yourself, is staying preserving you or postponing you? Is the relationship a refugee or a rehearsal of pain? Let our civic and emotional education teach this. That departure is not betrayal when the destination is dignity. That leaving is not failure when staying would mean forgetting who you are. You do not need to be certain. You need to be honest. And honesty, when honored, becomes the compass. So, if you feel you need to leave, but hesitate to decide, let the hesitation speak. Let it name your fears, your hopes, your thresholds. And when the time comes, let your decision be not an escape, but a declaration that you are worthy of a life where love is not a negotiation, but a nourishment. Thank you, Advocate, for having me.
Thank you, President, for reframing divorce not as a collapse of love, but as a collapse of structure. Your diagnosis reminds us that when covenant is reduced to ceremony, when emotional neglect is legally invisible, and when dignity is not protected in dissolution, we do not just lose a marriage, we lose a civic framework. To our audience, if you're ready to challenge the quiet fractures that precede divorce, to restore dignity in how we separate, and to build homes where covenant is understood, not just celebrated, Springfield Research University invites you. Visit www.springfieldresearchuniversity.net and join the mission to transform marriage into architecture and separation into structured healing. That brings us to the end of this courageous edition of Springfield Career Insights. May tonight's reflections offer clarity, conviction, and civic courage. I am Clarence, your host. Good
night.